I've been racking my brain this week trying to figure out the context for this little set of sayings in Matthew 5. What problem was Jesus trying to address? What was Jesus responding to? Were people making oaths, left, right, and center? Were they swearing an oath about the most basic of things, like what they were going to have for breakfast? Who was swearing oaths all the time? And I would love to tell you that I got the context all figured out this week, but I didn't. It's all speculation on my behalf. I was going to tell you that maybe there were certain things that were happening, not so much in Jesus' background, but in the context of Matthew's own gospel, the gospel writer's community in Antioch, and that there was extra motivation for providing these verses. That the Christians of Antioch were engaged in some sort of spat with other religious communities, and oath-making was a symbol of those others that were not behaving well in the eyes of Christians. And the truth is that I have no idea. And I'd penned a fair amount explaining all of the who's, what's, and whys for why I was speculating on this context, and came to the conclusion that while my job is not to entertain, this was turning out to be the most boring sermon I had ever written in my entire life. So even if you think what I say from here on out is dull, please know that it was better than what I had. So Jesus says, do not swear at all. Do not make any oaths. Rather than ask why he said that, I instead propose to look at what people have done with those verses since he said them. Who has taken these verses seriously, and what were the ramifications? And in fact, you get reminded of these verses, or you ought to be reminded of the values of truth-telling, letting your yes be yes, honest conduct. Whenever you have breakfast in the morning and you see a certain Quaker man staring back at you in the face. Quaker Oats. The company says that their Quaker Man logo doesn't represent an actual person, but that they chose this logo because the Quaker faith projects the values of honesty, integrity, and purity. Quakers have been frequently imprisoned because of their refusal to swear loyalty oaths, largely based on these verses in Matthew. Testifying in court was often incredibly difficult, especially for people like George Fox, the founder of the Quaker movement in the 17th century, who, when put on the stand, challenged a judge who had asked him to swear an oath to tell the truth, saying that he would do so once the judge could point to any biblical passage where Jesus or his apostles took an oath. The judge could not do so, and that definitely did not prevent Fox or his followers from getting into all sorts of legal issues. It's not just the Quakers, of course. The Mennonites and their confession of faith was devised, in which it says that we commit ourselves to telling the truth, to giving a simple yes or no, and to avoiding the swearing of oaths. That Jesus told his disciples not to swear oaths, but to let their yes be yes and their no be no, and that we believe that this teaching applies to truth-telling as well as to avoiding profane language. An oath, and I find this to be particularly instructive, an oath is often sworn as a guarantee that one is telling the truth. This implies, or may imply, that when one has not taken oath, one may be less careful about telling the truth. But Jesus' followers are always to speak the truth, and in legal matters to affirm that their statements are true. Jesus' counsel to tell the truth without oaths and to be true in our relationships applies to family life, business dealings, advertising, and other agreements that we make. In other words, the Mennonite position is that we don't take oaths in part because you can rely on the word of a Mennonite in court, because you can rely on the word of a Mennonite any other time as well. Or to put it even more crudely, who cares if you put your hand on the Bible? What would that matter if you are unscrupulous in the rest of your dealings? The topic of oath-taking is not merely a religious construct. In the late 19th century in the United Kingdom, there was an uproar over Charles Bradlaugh, who was elected to Parliament in 1880 and asked to take the oath in order to take his seat. And as an atheist, he felt he could not do so in good conscience, which asked him to swear to a God in which he did not believe. Bradlaugh was a pro-union, pro-universal suffrage, pro-Irish home rule, pro-Indian independence, anti-socialist atheist who was very popular in his home district of Northampton. And because members had to take the oath before being allowed to take their seats, he effectively forfeited his seat for a while. His seat fell vacant, and by-elections were declared multiple times, and Bradlaugh was re-elected by the citizens of Northampton 4 times in a row while the dispute continued. Opposing his right to sit was the Conservative Party, the Archbishop of Canterbury, other leading figures in the Church of England, and the Roman Catholic Church. And guess what? Now a statue of Bradlaugh is located in Northampton. The statue points west toward the center of the city, and on the inscription it says, 4 times elected to Parliament in vindication of the rights of constituencies, India too chose him her representative, a friend of the people, a life devoted to progress, liberty, and justice. In other words, it simply won't ever suffice to say that the taking of a religious oath or making any kind of oath at all is the precursor to either truth-telling or the pursuit of justice. Bradlaugh refused the oath because he didn't believe in the God that was being invoked and pursued a life of justice on behalf of working people and the right to self-determination for peoples across the empire. George Fox and the Quakers and the Mennonite movement and plenty of other Christian groups have come to the conclusion that Jesus' instruction is not simply about swearing oaths, but is about the entire foundation of your life, a commitment to telling the truth, that the truth can't simply exist in court as if court were a vacuum, but that it matters how one conducts oneself everywhere else as well. And that, my friends, feels to me like if I were preaching this sermon at the start of my career 20 years ago, I could now call it quits. But we live in a world where my Christian ethics professor, Steve Long, whose class I took 22 years ago, just published a book called Truth-Telling in a Post-Truth World. And that title probably raises very few eyebrows. The assertion that we now live in a post-truth world. It is astonishing how, across several generations, the pendulum has swung. In 1882, Mark Twain published a little essay entitled On the Decay of the Art of Lying, in which he said, "The wise thing is for us diligently to train ourselves to lie thoughtfully, judiciously, to lie with a good object and not an evil one, to lie for others' advantage and not our own, to lie healingly, charitably, humanely, not cruelly, hurtfully, maliciously, to lie gracefully and generously, not awkwardly and clumsily." That the lie and the production of lies are inevitable, and that to produce a lie for the benefit of another is perhaps not such a bad thing. This might have raised some eyebrows in 1882. 10 years later or so, Oscar Wilde publishes an essay similarly titled The Decay of Lying and Observation, a Socratic-style essay that concludes that at the dawn of the fields like sociology and psychology, a realism and empiricism has taken hold of people so that data has become more important and valued than art. Art, is claimed, does not imitate life, but life imitates far more. And Wilde postulates big, bold, beautiful lies, the kind that one finds in art, in good art, in beautiful art, that does not merely stretch the truth, but reveals it because of its boldness and beauty. Then one might see that the lie is necessary to a full life in this construct. But Wilde's lies are not our lies. When Wilde talks about lies and when Twain talks about lying, they're both in the service of a virtue that does not immediately benefit themselves. Twain wants lies to advantage others. Wilde wants lies to unmask beauty. Only a handful of generations ago, people were writing essays that complained that people were too beholden to the truth for their own good. In our generation, we have, though widely distributed at this point, essay from Harry Frankfurt. My, how things have changed in the last 115 years or so. Professor Emeritus at Princeton, Frankfurt entitled an essay on BS, who differentiates between the truth teller and the liar by adding a third category, the BSer. He says, for the BSer, all bets are off. He's neither on the side of the true nor on the side of the false. His eye is not on the facts at all, as the honest man and of the liar are, except insofar as they may be pertinent to his interest in getting away with what he says. The liar may be restored to truth-telling. The BSer has just given up on it completely. Theologians will argue that the truth is more powerful than the lie, because at the root of the truth is God, and God is both truth and the source of truth. And that can feel awfully flimsy to even the most faithful people at times when you consult the Gospels and focus on Jesus' pre-resurrection in John 18. Before Pilate asked Jesus, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answers, "You say that I'm a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate asks him, as any good BSer would, "What is truth?" That is not an attempt to answer the question with sincerity or integrity, but to begin to compile a rationale for why he's going to let Jesus be executed. What is truth? Who could possibly know if any truth exists anywhere at any time? Rather than asking a set of much deeper or more important questions in this moment, is what is happening in front of me just? What context is this taking place in? What is the history here? Who has the power in these relationships? Why are some people interested in getting rid of this guy? No, like any good BSer, Pilate asks what's in it for him through obfuscation. You can't really understand truth, so let's just ask philosophically, as if this is all a philosophical exercise when he has a life in his hands. What is truth? And here you get to a very basic realization about truth and truth-telling, that telling the truth didn't seem to go very well for our most highly esteemed truth-tellers: Socrates, Jesus, John Brown, Martin Luther King, and any number of other people we find more persuasive once they are dead. I saw some of the Jesus Pilate pattern, what is truth pattern, right here in Montclair on Wednesday night. I was with Grace and Vicky and Michelle and Roxanne and Jade at Union Baptist Church for their Break the Hate series. At the end of that evening, a young woman, a student, stood up and talked about how in the midst of this wave of anti-Semitism in our country, people seem to be willing to show up for Jewish students and Jewish citizens, and that there was nothing wrong with that. That people were rightfully outraged about what has happened in our community and around our country. But then she said, but when our district superintendent, our own district superintendent of schools, said that he understands the needs of black people because they used to work on his dairy farm when he was a kid, and that racist teachers aren't a problem so long as they teach well, no allies came and supported black people then. Nobody was outraged then except some black people. And so for me, in my construct and the way that I typically understand truth, the first question for me is, what is the truth about what he said? As a philosophical exercise, what is the truth? Did he say it? Were these things ever uttered? And that may be an important question, but there are no minutes. There are no recordings of him speaking. And so it simply becomes a matter of what memories exist around this moment. And the superintendent, of course, said that his words were taken out of context and that he was completely misunderstood and that people who weren't present in the room when he was supposed to have said these things began to sound like maybe they had. And then, of course, in the aftermath, what happens in our modern society? Facebook takes over. Accusations happen, finger-pointing happens, blame. Did he say it or not? And so the temptation is to say, look, you can't ever know the truth about this. We weren't there. He seems like an okay guy to me. So let's move on. The person who is angriest, maybe they weren't there either. So what is truth? What is truth even possibly? What could it be in this situation? And so people like me, we move on. Those who aren't harmed, we move on. Those without a history of being insulted or diminished, those without a particular kind of history, we readily move on. What is truth? I am wondering if the superintendent said what he said, when in fact the truth is that we have a much bigger, deeper, and more complex history that is in play in any kind of conversation like this in Montclair. A complex history that certainly has its bright spots, but also has a number of troubling components. We live now in a place that is touted for its diversity, where people move because of its diversity. And I was one of those people, and am one of those people, that was glad to move to a diverse community. But where there is a culture of people coming here and touting that diversity as the highest virtue, the highest value to which one can aspire, I did my part because I live in Montclair, a diverse community, and that I can show my friends elsewhere that I am suitably progressive because my children go to a diverse school. That is a truth, but of course it's not the truth. The truth, and I'm not claiming that I even have a handle on it, all that I know is that the truth is significantly deeper than that, more complex than that, more beholden to the needs of another than that, more encumbered by relationships than that, more recognizing of the history of our country than that. Could the superintendent have said what he said? It really doesn't matter if the broader truth of history and context and the pursuit of just ends are not accounted for in their entirety. And that, my friends, again, is the problem with trying to tell the truth, the real truth, the whole truth, the complex truth sometimes. It tends to make things incredibly, enormously challenging. Jesus knew this all too well.